Emily, I want to say thank you so much for being our moderator for today. And I'll let you go ahead and get this Twitter space started.
Thank you. I'm excited to be doing this. So we have Cyrus and Genesis here, and Stefania looks like she just joined. So yay, we've got everybody. And the subject of today's discussion is going to be the sunset review process, which you may know happens about every 12 years for state agencies. So it can be like a little bureaucratic to talk about, but there's 10 legislators and then two citizens, I guess, two people who are appointed. The whole group is appointed by the lieutenant governor and the Speaker of the House. And so this Sunset Commission is charged with this periodic review of agencies to see if things need to change legislatively, or they could recommend just getting rid of the agency altogether. So the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, which is the environmental regulatory group, was up for review this year. And a lot of organizers and advocates, like the people we're going to talk with today, have been involved in this process for a while. So in May of this year is when the Sunset Commission sort of gave its the Sunset Commission staff gave the commission its recommendations to consider, and then in June the commission took public comment. So lots of people from Houston and from all over the state went, and it was sort of this really interesting and compelling day of people saying how they believe the environmental regulators could be doing better to keep them and their families safe. So the big news was that recently the commission, having considered all of that comment and considered the suggestions from their staff, put forth kind of what they are going to ask what they are going to ask the legislators to do going forward. So I think Cyrus, Stefania, and Genesis are each going to kind of pick apart pieces of that. So I will go ahead and turn it over to you guys. And so Stefania, I think you're up first if you want to say briefly who you are and kind of go over what stood out to you when you looked at kind of where this process is now with these suggestions to legislators.
Great. Thanks, Emily. And hey, everyone. I'm Stefania Tomaskovic. I'm the director of the Coalition for Environment, Equity, and Resilience. And our coalition, also known as SEER, has been really involved in this process. One of the things that we truly value is the importance of listening to community, particularly the people who are most impacted by harms from facilities. So it was really important for us this past spring to take a lead role in helping to organize. We organized several sessions virtually to provide education to community members about the role of TCEQ and the sunset review process, why it's happening, what's going on. And we also hosted a people's hearing last April so that people could come and voice their concerns. And then with our partners, we also helped bus people to Austin to be able to speak directly to the commission so that they can share their experiences, their knowledge and insight as people with lived experience who are fighting, for their lives. Their health is at risk. So that has been a really important piece of this for us. And I want to tell you all a little bit more about public participation, given that's such a priority for our organization. So, with public participation within the process, there's a lot of things that community members have found really confusing about TCEQ's process. And, with what's come out from the recommendations from the Sunset Commission, there are some good things. There are some things that aren't so good. And we want to talk a little bit more about that. One of the things that I think is really good is that there's a recommendation to extend the deadline for contested case hearings. So we think this is a really good move because, one, it shows that there isn't interest in eliminating the contested case hearing option, which is something that as advocates we've been worried about. So contested case hearings are these administrative hearings where people can come in and challenge permits. And one of the things about this is it's basically like a legal, using the legal system to make a case for people who are impacted. And we think that one of the things that's really key here is how standing is defined in these instances, right? So to have standing in a contested case hearing, the TCEQ has a list of criteria, but even if you go through the sunset review reports, you'll see that there's some back and forth about what that actually means in terms of having standing, and working on getting more clarity around that, right? And one of the things that we think is really important in terms of having standing is that it needs to be expanded to sensitive use entities. This includes groups like a school or a daycare, because too often, children who have incredibly sensitive respiratory systems and can, have impacts from things that may not necessarily affect a healthy adult, they need to be prioritized in this process. So that is something that we think is really important here. In terms of the bad, I think one of the recommendations was to require an extension of the public comment period after a public meeting. But the bad thing with that was that there was a missed opportunity, and that is the opportunity to require a public meeting before the draft permit is issued. And one of the challenges here, and one of the major frustrations for community, is that by the time that a public meeting happens, the permit is already in place. It just feels like a check the box exercise, right? And that people come, they share their stories. Sometimes these stories are really painful and difficult for people who've been struggling living near facilities, struggling with their health, family members dying of cancer. It brings up a lot of grief and trauma. And for those community members to come in at this part of the process where everything is basically just set up, ready to go, check the box, we had the meeting, all right, let's move on with the permit. I think that is a big challenge for us, right? That once the draft permit's issued by TCEQ, they rarely make changes, and people feel left out of the process. They feel like things are coming into their backyard and they don't have a say in it at all. Now,
Can I just jump in real quick, Stefania?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Just to be clear, we all know what we're talking about. So what you and others were asking for was a public hearing before the draft permit was issued. Is that right?
That's correct.
And what they ended up saying was, we're not going to require an additional meeting, but we are going to allow 36 hours after the one public meeting to let people give a little bit more feedback, right? That was kind of where they ended up on that.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, cool. Just wanted to make sure everybody was kind of caught up there. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And then just the one other thing I want to mention quickly is that there's a recommendation to expressly hold virtual public meetings in lieu of in-person public meetings. And this could very well disenfranchise many groups of people. And our recommendation is to have both. If we want to get maximum participation, which from the perspective of my organization and the work that we do, that's what we want to do, is we want to maximize the ability of people to participate in processes that impact their communities. So we want to see TCEQ go forward with having both virtual and in-person meetings.
And the trouble with that is internet access or access to a computer.
Yes, that's right. That's right. When you look at certain communities, not everyone has access to internet. Not everyone has access to a computer, and having those in-person meetings are really important to have adequate engagement.
Yeah, it was interesting because during the pandemic is when I remember first covering virtual meetings. I don't know if TCEQ was doing it before then, but it seems like it did allow some people to participate who maybe might not have. But when I went back to cover my first in-person meeting after, the restrictions started to lift, it was like just this energy that felt so different in the room. And kind of like that face to, it was the resident looking at um the applicant and the regulators. It was really kind of a stark difference from the way the online model was.
Yeah, I think that's correct. I think that there is definitely value in having things virtually, right? I think the pandemic showed us that there's incredible value, and I think for some people the pandemic isn't over, and having access to meetings virtually is still really important. And for other people, having that in-person access is really important too. So I don't think it's a heavy lift to ask for both.
Hmm. Okay. Thank you. That was very helpful. So I hear you saying, there were a few good things that came out of this in terms of not getting rid of contested case hearings altogether. And there's a lot of points maybe where you wish they had gone further in their recommendations to legislators. So,
That's right.
yeah. Okay. Well, I'm sure we'll come back to those topics. I think Genesis now wanted to address some issues with language access. So, Genesis, if you want to say a little bit about who you are and then get into your observations with that.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much for hosting this space. I'm Genesis Granados. My pronouns they, them. I'm the Environmental Justice Coordinator at Air Alliance Houston. Of course, one of the things that is very important to cover is language access. That has been one of the issues that, TCQ, other state agencies have had for many years of how do we reach community in a language that they can access and that they understand. While some of the recommendations that were given to the TCQ from the Sunset Commission have potential in the sense of going towards where we want to go, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, especially when it comes to accessibility in regards to language and also public participation. Um, to really have true participation, it means providing information that is accessible for community members, that is inclusive of their native tongue, that it is in a language that they understand. And of course, that information needs to be given with sufficient time so that community members can make decisions on how they want to be involved and how much can they be involved. A lot of times, translation, interpretation, it's left till the last minute. So folks in community can't necessarily participate, right? Because they're not given enough time to really see what's happening, to really read on the permits, to really understand the needs of how it's going to impact their community. So it's very important to have that intentionality to connect to community, to members, to folks that are in school, to folks that are leading daycares, to pretty much everybody who makes community. um, that also of course includes doing outreach that's physical in the sense of agencies having someone canvas, having door knocking, to provide that information. As Stefania said, some folks don't have access to internet, some folks don't have social media, emails. So it's really important to have different ways to connect to the public so that they can truly be involved in that decision making. Um, One of the examples, right, that we saw was when we had the TCQ hearing in Austin. Really great that we got a lot of folks to be able to go to provide um, testimony. But one of the things that was definitely community led, was providing interpretation for folks that wanted to go to provide testimony in Austin, in their language that they feel comfortable. So, community organizations really set the time, set the advocacy to take interpreters, and these interpreters were paid by organizations, right, to be able to be present so that our Spanish speakers can provide their testimony. So it was really great to see, folks give their thoughts, give their experience in a language they feel comfortable, and have that interpretation. But again, that really came from community, that came from organizing together to get that resource, which agencies, that really want to include everyone, should be focusing on doing that instead of relying on community to always be the one to provide.
So when it came to the TCEQ and the sunset review process, I can't remember, did the commission staff recommend any changes on language? And maybe you can summarize a bit of what the speakers at that meeting, from the community were asking to see when it came to changing how the process works.
One of the things, that I believe it was about 5, 6 folks who spoke in Spanish, was, of course, having accessibility of all the information that is provided regarding permits, regarding hearings, in Spanish, but of course in other languages. Specifically here in Houston, we are a very diverse city. Um, so it is important to at least have, all the resources, all that information given out in languages that are predominantly used here. And TCQ seems to be lacking on that, even though they have had a plan. So a lot of what, the folks asked for was, having that accessibility to language, but also, being told this information on a timely manner so that they're able to, of course, share it with community. And of course, they provided their experience of living next to industry and how that impacts their health.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the recommendations that came out of the, what just came out in these recent weeks from the commission was they think that TCEQ should develop a Spanish version of the complaint form online. So that was one way they suggested making a change. But
Yeah.
it sounds like you're saying there really needs to be a more widespread look at language access throughout everything the agency does.
Yes. It's really great that they're doing that complaint now in Spanish, but there really needs to be an intentional look of accessibility and how does this information, is shared with community. Realistically, the website, a lot of folks have issues, even folks who have done the work, and are doing the work. It's still a very problematic website. So, for someone who might not necessarily have English, proficiency or understanding, it can be a very confusing website. So, while, how I said, there is potential, in providing more resources, they just overall need to actually evaluate how community participation is really playing out on the field, right? And what else can they do? Because language justice is not interpretation and translation only. It's really being intentional in the sense of having multilingual communities be present and participating in the decision making in their own language that they feel most comfortable using.
Mm-hmm. It seems like in some other issues I've covered, if there's a permit that communities are protesting, a lot of times people don't even know that the permit has been proposed until somebody like knocks on the door and tells them about it, or somebody calls them and tells them about it. So that issue of communication. And I think you were using the word intentionality is one I've heard, while I've been on this beat. So.
Yeah. So it's most often folks find out about what's happening when it's either too late or like the day of the hearing, or community organizations letting them know what's going on, or yeah, doing that physical work of going door knocking. And as organizations, yes, that's what we want to do. We want to provide that information. We want to uplift people's voices to be able to provide their input, but agencies, specifically TCEQ, need to really do more of an effort to do that type of information sharing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it seems like, again, on this topic, like the commission did make some recommendations that were a small step forward in your view, but again, did not go far enough.
Yes.
From my reporting with the enforcement and compliance, the big change there was that the commission did recommend increasing the daily fine up to a $40,000 cap from a $25,000 cap. So that, from a number of perspectives of advocates, was something that was a good thing in their eyes. But, again, there's these big questions of what role does TCEQ play, and what do residents and, everybody who's kind of got a stake in this want to see from them. But at the meeting in June, a lot of people who are on the oil and gas side did say they feel, good about the way TCEQ operates. So there's always going to be two sides to this, of course. I think maybe, Stefania, if next you can tell us about the process for what happens with these recommendations, like now that the commission has proposed to legislators what they want to see when the session starts next year, what will that process look like going forward?
Yeah, Emily, I'm happy to jump in here. And this is one of those things with Cyrus's dedication at the Capitol every legislative session that I think he's very well positioned to speak on. But just really quickly, I can say this whole process has gone from the Sunset Commission there was the Sunset staff who put together a report, and then the commission has made their recommendations, and now this is going to go to the legislature, and there's actually going to be a bill that needs to pass this spring in order for TCEQ to move forward from this. So there will be legislation passed this spring. And so I think, in terms of where we stand, we feel like that there is some opportunity to continue to influence the process during the legislative session, and to engage with all of our legislators, and not just the Sunset staff, but for all the people who are representing us, and make sure that they're provide education on the issues that are important to the community members that we're working with, help support community members in having those conversations as well with their legislators, and work on getting some of these initiatives to be more sufficient. From my perspective, that there are some good things, there are some things that just don't have just don't quite meet the mark, and so that will be one of the places where we'll continue to push for action for increased access to participation in TCEQ processes.
One of the things we haven't talked about yet is this idea of cumulative impacts.
Yes.
And how TCEQ doesn't have, as part of its permitting process right now, they just consider the permit in front of them and whether the facility, will be harmful to people living around it. But there's been a big push, especially recently, for the agency to also consider existing facilities in a neighborhood. And I think that ties into this topic of environmental justice because, of course, there's communities in Houston that are just bearing an unequal and greater proportion of the pollution. So if you or Genesis want to talk about that, why thinking about, or if y'all from the Sierra Club want to chime in too, why thinking about the cumulative impact is so important, and because that wasn't included in the sunset process, is there a way to address that outside, with a different bill or, some other way?
I am happy to get the conversation going on that question. Emily, I think that's really key what you're saying here about cumulative impacts. And when you read through the Sunset Report, they talk about maybe a lack of understanding from the perspective of community about what's safe. And to me, that description within the report is actually lacking because they completely exclude the conversation of cumulative impacts. So we know that for people in neighborhoods along the Houston Ship Channel in Fifth Ward, and in I can name a number of different communities around the Houston area that they are facing a number of different threats from multiple facilities. It's not just one thing. So when you add a concrete batch plant to the mix, it's not just the pollution from the concrete batch plant that they're dealing with, and the health thresholds that TCEQ may be looking at for that one threat, for that one facility, is not encompassing the other factors that are impacting people's health. So that's a really important piece that this process has completely left out. And yes, I do feel like there are other opportunities to address that since it's not part of this report. There has been legislation proposed in the past, and I know that there will be a continued push from advocates to propose additional legislation that really gets at that and the vulnerabilities that people face from multiple facilities and the health threats that they burden communities with.
Genesis, is there anything you want to add about anything Air Alliance is going to be doing going forward with this sunset process?
Yes. So one of the things, of course, is letting folks know of ways they can be involved after this, after the recommendation, specifically when it comes to contacting elected officials, right? Letting them know, hey, I want to be part of this conversation, right? Participating in the legislative process that's going to be happening next spring, since TCEQ must be passed as a bill. So there's still, ways to really become involved. We are hopeful that the TCEQ and overall this conversation will have more bolder, um, bigger, bolder with the improvements. So we really are hoping that things are just bigger and better, and of course letting community know how they can be involved after these recommendations have been given.
Can you also talk a little bit about TCEQ had been holding, or was it the EPA had been holding hearings about language access? And I think there's a separate process moving forward around that. If you could address that, Genesis.
Yes, of course. So there is a civil rights complaint and action that's happening from the EPA in regards to public participation. So there is actions that are holding the TCEQ accountable, taking place that are against the TCEQ. And this, of course, provides overall ways for community to be involved, but also knowing that we're holding the TCEQ accountable, and that there's other individuals that have noticed their lack of intentionality when it comes to public participation. Stefania, is there something you want to add?
Yeah, no, I think you got it, Genesis, that, yeah, this really came out of a complaint filed from Sierra Club and from Tejas. And I know there's been a number of groups that have come to TCEQ's public participation plan meetings that is now being developed as a result of this complaint. So I think you got it, Genesis.
It's interesting because when I first started reporting on this sunset process back in, I guess it was around May, when everyone was getting ready to go to Austin, I remember talking to some people in Houston who were like, maybe this will be a chance to see a big overhaul of the agency. And it seems like there was so much energy going into it, and from Cyrus and y'all at the Sierra Club too, just kind of organizing folks. And then the showing at that meeting in June was really, um, I think I said this already, but it was just pretty impactful to me as a reporter to see how many people cared enough to spend their whole day up in Austin sharing what they wanted to see change. So I don't know, maybe to close, Stefania and Genesis, if you guys just want to reflect big picture. It seems like there was some disappointment maybe with these. It's such a complex and nuanced thing, but when you get into the detail of what the commission proposed, I think it seems like overall there were just a few little good things, but this fell far short of what you all hoped. And now you're sort of talking about these next steps of how you, as organizers working with residents locally, can keep holding TCEQ accountable to what you all think they need to do. So maybe just some last, reflections, stepping back, looking at what the Sunset Review really ended up meaning to you all when you think about your roles generally here in Houston.
And you're right, Emily, that there have been, there are some things in this report, in these recommendations, that are beneficial, that will be good steps forward. And does it go far enough? From a lot of our perspectives, no, it doesn't go far enough. And I think this is somewhat the nature of reality for those of us who are doing this kind of work in Texas specifically, that that we do have a lot of energy and we want to see change happen. And we also need to recognize that change happens in its own way and on its own timeline sometimes, and that what we need to do is to continue to push forward. One of my mentors and heroes, Reverend James Caldwell, says often, that it's a long-term thing, right? That each step, we take each step and move forward the way we can, but we also need to recognize that there's a long game here, and we will continue to do what we can to push the envelope forward and seek out justice, because at the end of the day, we do want to move forward these changes that will protect people's health in an adequate way, and not just, as they say, put lipstick on a pig, like so we're going to keep working. We're going to keep moving forward, and we're not going to give up the hope just because this didn't quite meet what we want. We know that this is going to be a longer term battle to really get what we need to move forward and move equity and justice forward.
And this is Cyrus speaking from Alex Ortiz's phone. I had some problems with my phone. I have been listening. This is Cyrus Reed from the Sierra Club. And exactly, this is just the start of the process. We had some important victories. We got enforcement fines raised in the proposal. That's something that I would never expect to be able to pass with a very conservative chair and vice chair of the Sunset Commission. And we got a commitment to putting all permits online. Those are important victories that we need to maintain, but we need to do more. And we need people involved. and we need people contacting their legislators starting in January. So that this is just the beginning of the work. It's not the end. Let's all go forward.
Yeah, and agreeing both with what Stefania and Cyrus mentioned, this is just the beginning. They provided some pebbles of change and some good things that will provide more shifts, but it's just the beginning. There's still so much more that they can do, but also as folks who've been doing the work and continuing the work, one of our things is finding ways to letting folks know how they can be involved and share their stories. And airlines, we have action alerts that tend to be sent out when things are happening, when we need community input. So it's, of course, continuing starting January, right? Continuing to provide that information to community so that they are aware of what's happening and know that there's folks that want them to share their story, want them to be empowered, and want them to be involved.
Thanks. I don't know what the plan was, if you want to take a question or two, or if how you y'all want to handle the question part of this, if you would rather people just email you.
Well, we can have anyone email us any questions, but we did get one person saying that they work in Fifth Ward on the creosote issue, and that they were asking, it says, how to handle TCEQ's benign neglect of people in Fifth Ward. So I'm not sure if anyone, I know that that's a very specific question, so I'm not sure if anyone has any thoughts on TCEQ's issues with community outreach or anything like that.
I am not as familiar probably with others on this call about that particular situation. This is Cyrus with the Sierra Club. I will say, remember, one audience we have is the legislature and TCEQ. The other audience we have is the Biden administration and the EPA. And so in a lot of these fights we're having with TCEQ, we have to remember we have a fairly friendly administration on environmental issues. I won't say they're totally with us on every issue, but I know a number of us have been meeting with Region 6, and a number of us have been working on federal rules, like ending affirmative defense that allows companies to pollute, and getting better standards on air emissions in frontline communities. So let's remember, and we also have the threat of suing, right? Of suing EPA or the industries that don't follow the environmental law. So I think it's always important to remember some of our audience is state leadership, but our other audience is the White House and the EPA. So that I think that would be one important thing to say. I don't know if anyone else there in Houston has some specific advice.
Cyrus, I think that's some really good advice. And one of the challenges too is that commission meetings are held in Austin, because the commission is also another place where people can come and speak to things that are impacting them. And to my knowledge, and Cyrus, you might know more about this right now, the commission meetings are being held in person, but do you know if there's a virtual option?
There used to be a virtual option. I think they've moved away from that now, unfortunately. So you really, like at the Public Utility Commission, like at the Senate, like at the House, like at the Sunset, you almost have to go to Austin to participate.
Yeah, that's what I was afraid of. This goes back to public participation and how it can be as accessible as possible. This is clearly, a demonstration of how, it's not convenient for people living in the community to drive to Austin for, a 2-hour meeting on a Wednesday, anyway. So I think that kind of speaks to the point of, TCEQ can be very difficult to access for, for a community. And, I think Cyrus, you make some really good points. Right now, EPA has a strong focus on environmental justice. And we know that the leadership in Region 6 are very interested in working to do what they can from their position to help support issues. So yeah, I feel like there are some opportunities in working with the EPA to move forward some of these things where TCEQ has been dropping the ball and has been letting um, Emily, what was the word that you said? Benign negligence get in the way of actually protecting a community that has been substantially harmed by cancer-causing chemicals.
Okay.
And
I think
to that point, Hennis gave some great testimony on language access. The only reason that TCEQ is paying attention to language access is that a number of groups on this call, filed a civil rights complaint federally because of TCEQ's lack of access. So let's not forget that that pressure that we can bring to bear through legal actions is very important to making change, as well as community organizing and showing up and public participation. All these things we need to do together in order to be successful.
And I would just quickly add to that. This is Lindsay Mayer, comms coordinator with the Lone Star chapter. I've watched TCEQ meetings that actually did have a lot of public participation and public comment on a specific issue, and even administrative law judge, suggestions, and the commissioners all go the other way. So I'm skeptical personally as an observer and former reporter that the increased public participation is going to make a meaningful difference, but it will be interesting to see. I hope so, but I also think there's like a bigger picture need to educate people on how this system works and who appoints these commissioners, and it's actually an elected official who appoints the commissioners who are making these huge decisions.
Okay, I think our goal was to wrap up around 11:45, so I'm sure everybody on this is happy to get questions via direct message, or Air Alliance has offered to take questions at info@airalliancehouston.org. That was info@airalliancehouston.org. Thank you guys for inviting me to moderate, and thanks to all the speakers. I don't know, Cassandra, if there was anything you wanted to end on.
Yeah, I want to say again, thank you to everyone for pulling this together so quickly. And I really appreciate the dialogue that's happened here. And of course, again, you can email Airlines Houston, or you can DM our account, or, if there was a specific person that you wanted to message or ask a question, you can of course do that. And we've recorded this space, and we will be posting it sometime in the near future to let people listen to this conversation.
Okay, thanks everybody. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.